Hello everyone and welcome back to Brown Coat Reviews. I am here in front of our new background to talk about comic books. Now today we are going to talk about Ed Piskor's Red Room. This is a highly controversial story and they even admit on the cover that it has been banned in 5 countries. After reading the story, I'm not surprised that it's been banned. I'm just kind of surprised that there's not been as much of a strong reaction from the people who've actually read the story. So let me just give the fun disclaimers. I think the back cover kind of says it pretty clearly. If you cannot handle gore, this is not going to be your story. If you do not like despicable, deplorable, heinous things happening to innocent people, this is not going to be your story. So this is a horror story, but it is definitely very focused in on the gore, the things that are meant to make you sit there and go, ew. So if that is not your kind of horror story and you prefer more of maybe a suspense story, skip the Red Room. Just gonna say that right now. The main concept behind this story was a snuff film. Now, for those of you that do not know what a snuff film is, a snuff film is basically a recording of a pornographic murder. Typically, your murderer will have a mask on, so that way they can hide their identity and get away with the murder. Some people do get off on these things, and they have certainly been around for a very long time. So what Ed Piskor talks about, even in his little behind-the-scenes section at the very end of the book, over here, is he talks about, well, snuff films have been around and certainly have been released, whether it was in, individual camera shots, once upon a time versus film. And then in the 21st century, he's like, well, that would probably be something that would be available live. But how would you do it and not get caught? So he kind of went down his own little rabbit trail of, if I was trying to produce these films and I was trying to make money, how would I do it and keep it untraceable in a 21st century world where everything is traceable? So he created the Red Room. The Red Room is where you use Bitcoin to watch a live snuff film. And these are not just any murder. Each murder is trying to kind of up the next one. So if you thought the first one was gory, then the next one's going to be a little bit more grotesque and just a little bit more brutal and a little bit more of a shock factor to then try and encourage people to keep buying and getting more of these snuff films and to continue to keep subscribing and paying all the money. So the idea makes sense. The problem that I have with this story is that as a reader, if you have very little desire for snuff films, it's not my thing. There's very little in the storyline to kind of draw me in. For me, personally, if they would have taken the main characters and kind of thrown them into this world and shown me almost like, Alice jumping into the rabbit hole. Give me the other side of the looking glass and let me see this dark and twisty world of the dark web and kind of see the deplorable side, but maybe understand why some people would produce these films beyond the money. Then maybe I could have at least been drawn to the characters and maybe then I could see it through their eyes. And there's that sense of innocence that is coming into this severely dark world. Instead, our main characters don't have a lot of attributes that really kind of draw me in. So our main character is Mr. Fairchild. He is this gentleman here. He's fat, balding, mustache. He works for the judge's office in the criminal justice system, but he's pretty low down in the big scheme of things. He's also, in the very first page, let's just say they don't really treat women very nicely. And the people who are doing this, the police officers that are making these snide comments, Mr. Fairchild doesn't really stop them. So I'm like, okay, can't really root for you there. And within the first 3 pages, there's a horrible car accident and Mr. Fairchild's wife and one of his daughters is killed. So he's only left with his daughter, Brianna. And you'd think, well, with that kind of tragic event, I would be drawn to these characters. but the way that they react to the loss, there's something in it that I couldn't get into it. There wasn't a lot of focus in on the loss itself. There wasn't a lot of focus in on the recovery. It was just almost like this event happened and then we move on. And then we all we're broken and we don't know what to do. And then we still have the Red Room. And then we eventually see how Mr. Fairchild comes into play with the Red Room. There is a final twist with him. And by the time his twist came in, I was pretty much done with the story. I was only finishing it just so that way I could talk to you all about it. But if I wasn't doing a review on this channel about this story, I would have gotten about 5 pages in and I would have stopped reading and just gotten rid of the book. There wasn't enough there. There wasn't enough story. There wasn't enough character, just something. Now, before you sit there and immediately write me off and say, well, Laura, you just can't handle proper horror. Let me give you a great example. There was a CW series called 2-Sentence Horror Story. There was an episode called The Portrait. And this is also a dark web story. So the concept behind the 2-Sentence Horror Story was that someone would give the writers 2 sentences and then they would create an entire storyline, self-containing in one episode, with these horror elements. And they could place it in whatever time frame they wanted. So you get the first sentence at the beginning of the episode, you get the second sentence at the very end of the episode. But then, of course, we as viewers, we only see the first sentence, and then we get kind of the twist at the end. So the story for The Portrait started with a YouTuber, and she's doing this makeup tutorial. And partway through the makeup tutorial, you start seeing someone in the background breaking into her house. And then suddenly he hits the power on the house, and now she's looking through the house to try and find out, what happened, find the source of the issue, and you see him kind of hiding and deciding when he's going to attack. The story then flips on its head, and you realize that no, it's not him breaking into her house. She lured him into her house, and she's using this recording on the dark web to record her hunting, murdering, and using his skin to create a mask. And the portrait that she's creating, she was doing a makeup tutorial to then show how the makeup underneath this skin mask kind of makes the eyes pop. Honestly, the horror story before that was very suspenseful and it was very intriguing, and I was kind of rooting for her and I was curious what was going to happen, and I had no idea that she was the killer. Didn't know. I was waiting to see if she was going to be able to escape the house, what was going to happen, and then when it twisted on me, and I realized that no, she's not the victim, she's actually the murderer. And it got dark and twisty, and suddenly everything with my perspective changed. I was like, oh. And I mean, you see the skin mask, and it's creepy as all get out. It's a skin mask. You're not supposed to look at it and go, oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. It was creepy. And it definitely added to the chill factor, but then you start looking at how they kind of piece together this really short story, and you see how you were drawn in, and when you got the rug pulled out from under you, you're like, oh, that was brilliant. And there are a lot of people that watched this series, and yeah, some of the stories were okay, but a lot of people were really kind of taken by that one individual issue, or that one episode. There was something about it that was really unique, and it was great storytelling. So I don't mind something that kind of pushes my boundaries, and I don't mind if you're going to have something grotesque, you need to have a story behind it that makes me want to learn more, or makes me go, oh my gosh, I didn't see that coming. That's so amazing. And Red Room didn't do that. Instead, Red Room started kind of on that same level of, we're going to introduce these characters. There's going to be some deplorable things that happen. There are not going to be a lot of redeeming qualities. And then we're going to keep showing these different sequences from the Red Room. And one of the biggest missed opportunities that I found is they do show the live stream of the Red Room. And what they will have is, like, on the comic book page, which, no, I'm not going to show you. On the comic book page, you will have the images from the snuff film that's live, and you kind of have the little, insert so many bitcoins, and you also have, like, if people are adding tips, like tip as in tip money, added because they liked what they had seen. But then you also had sort of this comment section of people who were watching live and giving some feedback, whether they felt that this image was to their liking. And instead, all it did was add to the simple truth that we knew before we started watching or reading these snuff films, which was there are people that are very turned on by these things. There are people that will always want more violence, more pushing of those boundaries, and that's all the comments achieved. Instead, I wanted more from those. I'm like, if you're gonna add the comments, then it needs to have some other point or purpose. And instead, it just kind of sat there flat and gave us some pretty disturbing images. So, in the end, Red Room, there are horror stories out there that achieve what the Red Room tried to do 100 times better. And I'm not just talking about grotesque things. I'm just saying, if you want to read a horror story, there are better ones out there. If you want a suspense story, if you want those characters and you want those moments where you're on the edge of the seat and you cannot wait to flip the page to find out what's going to happen, there are better stories. This is pure shock value. This was just meant to make you open the book and go, oh my gosh. And it achieved that. But once you get past the shock value and you suddenly look beyond the images and the things that they are trying to portray and say, what's next? There's not enough to carry the rest of the story. Even the main dominatrix that's there, she's an intriguing character, but there still wasn't enough for me to be like, all right, I'll keep tuning in to see what's going on with her. It was all missing. And that's why Red Room is going to be a ton of hype. But when it comes to actually reading this series, it was not worth it to me. There may be so many of you that completely disagree with me. And some of you may just love this idea and appreciate that the author was willing to go to those depths. I appreciate the thought. But the execution to me, I needed more. So, my big question for you all, do you agree with me? Did you read The Red Room? Did you enjoy it? Or was this just too dark, twisty, too far down the rabbit hole? Too much? Because, like I said, there's kind of a fine line between too much and a great story. And to me, this was just too much. So if you did not like The Red Room, is there another story that maybe you liked better? If you did like The Red Room, I'd love to hear from you all. What was it about The Red Room that really pulled you in? Did you like the art style? Listen, it's definitely black and white. It is definitely meant to be very shocking. Did you enjoy it? This is Laura from Brown Coat Reviews. And sadly, I'm just a little disappointed. But I will see you all again next time. Have a great day.